Good morning. You might have to add chairs or something. Looking squeezed. It's not a bad thing. All right, so this morning, as we continue our study through the Revelation, we finished last time in Revelation 6, and I'm not going to read back through this, but I do want you to see. This is where he opens the sixth seal, and this is the one that can be very kind of, wait a minute, where is this and when is this happening and I just admitted that I'm not sure exactly. I do think this fits in the sequence, but some of this almost seems like it's the very end, and yet we're only at seal 6, and we have the seventh trumpet, or seventh seal, and then the trumpets and the bowls, and so but I do want you to see kind of the context of where we're at. I want to take a moment here for a pause to explain some pauses you'll see in the text. And this will take us just a second. So we're at this point last week, seal 6. Revelation 7, what we're going to look at this week, is kind of one of these pauses in the action, so to speak. As you see, then you'll have the seventh seal, which will come next week. Then that leads us into the trumpet judgments, and we'll see in rapid fire trumpet. Did I misspell trumpet or something? No? Okay. I heard a chuckle, and I'm used to misspelling things. So. Trumpets 1 through 6. Then there's another pause, and you see Revelation 10, 1 through 11, 14. That's another pause in the action, and then you have trumpet 7. Then there unleashes the first six bowl judgments, and then another pause. There's another pause kind of injected in there. It's this it's one here, Revelation 12 to 14. It kind of comes after trumpet 7 and before you get into the bowls. So I just want you to be aware, the book does lay out rather chronologically, but there are these pauses that are kind of chucked in, and that can make it a little bit confusing. So I wanted you to see and understand that before we go rocketing through here and you're going, wait a minute, what? I thought that was, what about, so I just want you to see that. So this morning we are here at this pause. We're at the pause that is next. So chapter 1, verse 8 is where we see the seventh seal open. Okay, so that's next week. So this is where we are right now. This is the Revelation 7, and it's in between the sixth and seventh seal. I want you to see something here, though, too. I've only seen, I think, one commentator make reference to this. So let me pause, not in the study, but pause for a moment and make a commentary comment. We are really heading into the part of the book that there is far more mystery about. And commentators and men that I care about and respect will disagree with me on things, and I will with them. And so this section, probably more than most, is a great opportunity for us to disagree and love one another and thereby demonstrate that we're His, right? Jesus says they'll know you're my disciples by your love one for another. And nobody's impressed when we love each other and agree. Obviously, anybody can do that. It's when we disagree and we still love each other that it kind of, wow, what's wrong with these guys? So this section that we're headed into is really where that becomes a bigger deal. So the seventh seal opens, and there is silence in heaven for about a half an hour. That's what's coming in chapter 8. Right? That comes right after the sixth seal. There's a parenthesis here. I think this parenthesis, what we're going to see, this sealing of these 144,000, is what's occurring during this half-hour pause, this half hour of silence. And I'll explain why I think that. But you'll see that unfold as we go here, and if you disagree with me on that, that's fine. It's not a big issue. But I actually think that's why there's this half-hour pause. So everything stops, and he seals these 144,000, and now the action picks back up again. And you'll see that this morning. Okay, so with all of that said, we ended last time with the end of chapter 6 saying, who can stand? They have just seen some amazing things happening. Stars falling, again, not literally, but meaning like comets and things like that, asteroids. We know today a star is 1,000 times bigger than our planet. It can't fall on us, right? So it's not talking about that. It's talking about like a shooting star type thing. But the sky vanishes, it's rolled up, mountains are moved, and all this stuff. And the unsaved are saying, the wrath of the Lamb is here. Who can stand? In other words, who can possibly survive what we're headed into? This is unbelievable. Who could possibly survive? And so chapter 7 really is the answer to that question, or at least some of that answer. So on your sheet it says, what is the answer to the question, who can stand? And that's the point of our morning. So let's look at 7, 1 through 8. This is the first half of it, and then we'll see the other half. I'll go ahead and read this for us. It says, after this I saw 4 angels standing at the 4 corners of the earth, holding back the 4 winds of the earth, that no wind might blow on earth or sea or against any tree. Then I saw another angel ascending from the rising of the sun with the seal of the living God, and he called with a loud voice to the 4 angels who had been given power to harm the earth and sea, saying, do not harm the earth or the sea or the trees until we have sealed the servants of our God on their forehead. And I heard the number of the sealed, 144,000, sealed from every tribe of the sons of Israel. And then it lists the 12 tribes, and the 12,000 from each tribe were sealed. So, after this, so this is after the 6th seal is opened, this happens. He says, I saw 4 angels standing at the 4 corners of the earth, holding back the 4 winds of the earth, that no wind might blow on earth or sea or against any tree. So first thing, we know the earth is not square, and so does God. He's not saying it's square. That's not what's meant by the 4 corners. It's simply a reference to north, south, east, west, that kind of thing. Actually, what's interesting is they now understand that the earth does have like 4 parts of it that kind of stick out slightly from the sphere when they measure it more carefully with our modern technology. So is that a reference to that? Don't know. It's not a relevant point, but this is one of those things where skeptics will say, aha, see, you guys are stupid and think the earth is square. And that's not what it's saying. It's simply a figure of speech. The fact that they're holding back the wind is pretty amazing. It is almost like Joshua's long day, where there's this extra 3 hours of daylight. It doesn't make sense, right? The reason I say that is wind is produced by the rotation of the earth and the sun and all this stuff. And to turn all of that off is miraculous. I mean, it is just like everything goes dead calm. All of the water is just flat on all the oceans and the lakes. Everything's just still, silent. The silence in heaven for half an hour, I think, correlates with this no wind. Everything just stops. I think that's kind of what's being described there. So this is what's happening, I believe, during that half hour of silence in heaven. I want you to notice that they're not to blow wind on earth, sea, or any tree, and that gets repeated multiple times here. It's interesting, in the coming judgments, these are the things that are hit. These judgments that are coming in the trumpets and the bowls are on the earth, on the sea, and on the trees. So what's being held back is the judgment that's coming, right? And you'll see that here as we move forward. It says, then I saw another angel ascending from the rising of the sun with the seal of the living God, and he called with a loud voice to the 4 angels who had been given power to harm the earth and the sea. So these angels specifically are going to harm the earth and the sea. That's what they're going to do in the trumpet and bowl judgments, and they're being held back from doing that for a period of time. And he says, don't do that. Do not harm the earth or the sea or the trees, right? Until we have sealed the servants of our God on their forehead. So this is all being held back until these 144,000 are sealed or protected from the coming judgment. Okay? So that's why there's this pause in the action, is God saying, okay, I've got 144,000 that I'm going to go out and put a seal on, and then they will be protected from now on from all that's about to be unleashed. And so hold off on this coming judgment until I get these 144,000 protected, is the way to think of that. Okay, go ahead.
Did that happen already?
No.
And their spirit, this is
all future.
All future, so it hasn't, this is what's going to happen.
Yes, starting chapter 4, verse 1, if we remember the outline of the book, it is write what you've seen, write what is, it's the now, that's chapters 2 and 3. The what you've seen is chapter 1. And then write the things that will happen after this, that's chapter 4 to the end. So everything from here forward is all future. So this is there just so you can see, again, it talks about this half hour of silence. All right. I think I duplicated some of these slides here. All right. So the question, who can stand, is the 144,000. That is kind of the answer to their question at the end of chapter 6. Actually, let me back up. Yeah. So there is where it talks about them, that they are being sealed and so that they're protected. So that is part of the answer to who can stand. There are other people who will be able to stand, and we'll meet them later, which I have a question mark. There are other people we're going to see that can do that will be able to stand as well. I wanted to come back to something from last week, and I thought this was the most appropriate part to do that. What is Hades? Got asked last week. And if you know me well enough, you can see the wheels spinning and the squirming. Because I'm like, I don't quite know how I want to answer that question right now, so press pause. But I can't do that to you all. So I wanted to come back and address this. I did see, or I had thought of Hades as grave. And somebody mentioned, Ray, I think, chimed in and said hell. I think my mom was the one asking the question, thinking it was hell. I was thinking not. Error on my part. That's good from time to time for that to happen, because it reminds me that I actually don't know everything, which I already know that, but it lets you all know that I don't know everything. So this is the verse in question in chapter 6. It says, I looked, and behold, a pale horse, and its rider's name was Death, and Hades followed him. So this is the question, what is Hades there? Is that hell, or what is that? So what I did is I looked up the Greek word used there, and it's used 11 times in the New Testament, I think 8 of which it's translated hell. So clearly, obviously, Hades can be hell. Here are 3 of them. I picked 3 just to demonstrate this. The gates of hell. We don't think of that as the grave. Clearly, that's referring to hell. O death, where is your sting? O grave, where is your victory? Hell in that one doesn't really make much sense. If someone's in hell, it does have victory. But for us who are saved, the grave does not have victory. So it can't mean hell, it would have to mean grave. Acts 2, it's used, and it's quoting David from the Old Testament, who's talking about the afterlife. And in the Old Testament, it's Sheol, which is the grave. And here in Acts 2, when they quote it, they use this same word, Hades. So it is used differently in different contexts, which leads us to the point of, what is Hades? Well, it is hell, it is grave, it's used both ways. So we're back to, what does it mean here, right? What does it mean in this context? Let me explain to you why this is what was in my mind last week, and I wasn't quite sure how to explain it. Here at the bottom, if tribulation saints can die from things like famines and pestilence, okay, not martyrdom, of course they can die from martyrdom. Can they die from the judgments of God? Can they die from the famine, from the pestilence? If they can, then Hades has to mean grave. If it means hell, then that means the saved are going to hell. That doesn't make sense, right? So it would have to be grave in that context. If they can't die of famines and pestilence, then it does mean hell. Does that make sense, what I just said? I'm getting nods. Okay, so you understand now I'm not sure what that means yet. I don't know if that's hell. I don't know if that means grave, because I don't know if they can die. Why do I not know that? I should know that, right? Well, because number one, I don't know everything. And number two, I think we'll see that kind of unfold, and I just don't think I've not got to a point where I feel confident to tell you that the only way a believer can die during the tribulation is by martyrdom. I'm not at that position. I'm not taking the other position, and here's what I've heard commentators say, well, surely some of the saved are killed in the earthquake. Well, not surely. I mean, he can protect them if he wants to. But, again, we just saw, hold back the judgments. Why? So I can protect my 144,000. They're unique. They're protected from these judgments, right? So does that mean if you're saved but not sealed as part of the 144,000, you're not protected? That's a good inference to draw, but I don't know yet. So that, believe it or not, that's what was spinning in my mind last week when I'm being asked by my mom if that's hell or not. Hold on a second. But my point is, this is how detailed this is. This is why this book is hard to get your head around. It's why good men have different opinions and why we ought to love each other through those and definitely talk through it, debate. I don't mean fight. I mean back and forth as to know, why do you think that or why do you think that? So I'm telling you, I don't know if it's hell or Hades, grave. I don't know, because I haven't quite figured that out yet. Go ahead.
Are you using hell synonymously with eternal lake of fire?
Yes, because that's the way hell is always used. But it is not the lake of fire, you're right, yeah. The lake of, and I think Ray's the one that brought this up last week, death and hell are thrown into the lake of fire. But I don't think we ever see a place where saved people go to hell and then into heaven. Do you know what I mean? So it's like Abraham's bosom prior to the resurrection. That's where the saved were at. It's not called hell. But the rich man, I don't know that it calls it hell in that context. But my point is, Hades, yeah. But my point is, hell is where those who are unsaved go after their death while waiting to go into the lake of fire. And those are different. Hell and the lake of fire
Is
would be
hell
different.
also a place of torment?
Torment, yeah.
Also.
And we see that from Luke's account where the rich man is there suffering and dying, not dying, but he can't die. Have Lazarus dip my finger in water and put it on my tongue and quench my thirst, and right? So it's a terrible place, but it's not the lake of fire, but it is the place of judgment for those who are unsaved. And that's the way I'm using it in this context. Let me come to here in a second. Go here first.
Isn't it kind of the same principle, though, is there's hell and then there's the lake of fire. There's also paradise and then there's heaven.
Yes. Yes.
Yeah.
Now, let me say this. Post-resurrection, I don't think there's a paradise
Right.
now. We would go straight into the presence of the Lord currently. I don't, you know what I'm saying? We're not in Abraham's bosom. Your grandparents who passed away in a faith are in heaven currently, not in Abraham's bosom. I don't think that has changed, though, for folks that are in hell. Okay, I got a question over here.
I had a question about the 12 tribes.
I'm gonna go to that. Can I please ask it again when we get there if I don't address it?
Would the Old Testament saints be in Abraham's bosom yet, though?
Yeah, I think so. That's my take currently is yes. Go ahead.
Just the opposite.
Okay. This is where good
It
men
says
love each other.
When Jesus ascended,
Yep,
he took the captives with him.
that's true, yeah.
And I believe those captives were the people in paradise.
Yes.
Into heaven.
Now that you say that, that is, yeah, when you asked the question, I think what was in my mind is I was thinking resurrection. The resurrection of the Old Testament saints is later, but yes, you're right, they are currently in heaven, yeah.
The body
The-
resurrection will be
Well, later, but their spirit is with the Lord today, yeah. I'm with you. Yep, sorry about that. Go ahead.
So we have heaven now, where the saints are.
Yes,
But then heaven's gonna, as we studied, when we
Yep.
studied heaven, it's gonna come back to earth, and
Right.
the earth is going to
New
be.
heaven and the new earth.
New earth.
In the new earth. So is this hell and the lake of fire kind of like that? We have hell as it is now, and then the lake of fire is kind of like the permanent.
yeah, I think that's somewhat of a good analogy. The one thing I think, though, is the new heavens and new earth, I don't think is talking about God's dwelling. The new heavens there, I think, is the created order, is what's new. In other words, like a new sun and a new planet and a new whatever, although it says there's no sun in the eternal state. But the point is, I think it's that heaven. God's heaven's never been defiled. There's no reason for it to be made new. And it's the new Jerusalem that comes down. So I don't think it gets replaced. It just relocates, so to speak, where hell, that place of current torment, is tossed into the lake of fire. Whether it's literally physically picked up and put, you know what I mean, or whether it just means there's a transfer from one location to another, I don't know. All right. I want you to see this. This is in 2 Peter. I'm not going to take the time to read it for the sake of time, but it talks about, for God did not spare angels, and then he talks about Lot and Noah and all these folks. There's judgment coming, and he's rescuing these folks, the saved, out of these extreme Sodom and Noah and the flood and all that. At the very end, here in verse 9, it says, "Then the Lord knows how to rescue the godly from trials, and to keep the unrighteous under punishment until the day of judgment." So the point is, God is totally able to hold his saints unharmed during the tribulation, and the only way they could die would be martyrdom. That's possible, right? But we don't know if that's how that's going to work or not. So I'm not taking a position because of not really fully getting it yet. All right. So I'm going to add a group and then a question mark to my first answer. What is the answer to the question, who can stand? We know that the 144,000 can stand. And we will read later, and we won't look at it this morning, that the Jewish remnant will stand, those that are rescued by Christ. And then there is this third group. Will some of them, will they stand in that they will be able to not die from pestilence, famine, things like that? That's what I'm telling you, I don't know yet. So, all right, so who are the 144,000? Let's look at that. And I just thought of this. I should have given you more room on your sheet for the answer to that question, but you'll understand why I say that when I get to it. All right, so let's look at this. This is a great description of them. This is in chapter 14, so we're jumping ahead a bit, but I want you to see it. It says, "Then I looked, and behold, on Mount Zion stood the Lamb, and with him 144,000, who had his name and his Father's name written on their foreheads. And I heard a voice from heaven like the roar of many waters, and like the sound of loud thunder. The voice I heard was like the sound of harpists playing on their harps. And they were singing a new song before the throng, and before the four living creatures, and before the elders. No one could learn the song except the 144,000 who had been redeemed from the earth. It is these who have not defiled themselves with women, for they are virgins. It is these who follow the Lamb wherever he goes. These have been redeemed from mankind as first fruits for God and the Lamb, and in their mouth no lie was found, for they are blameless." That's a really great description of who these 144,000 are. There's these two passages that help us get a good description of them. So there's my answer to that question. I'll leave that up for a bit since it's long. They are Jewish males. We know that because there's 12,000 from each of the 12 tribes. It describes them as men, sons. Then it talks about them being virgins. It talks about them being redeemed as first fruits, meaning they're saved, but then they bring others. They follow the Lamb wherever he goes, who are marked with the name of God on their forehead. We see that in chapter 14. Who don't lie. There's no lie found in their mouth. Who are blameless. Doesn't mean sinless, but it does mean they live righteously. Who are invincible missionaries. And that's the point where we're seeing this morning, is what's about to unleash on the earth in the coming chapters is not only the wrath of God, but the Antichrist going after the Jewish nation and trying to eradicate them. And these guys are protected from that. Not only are they protected from the judgments of God, the Antichrist can't kill them. They're supermen in that way almost. Okay? Who survive until the second coming. Now, why do I say they survive until the second coming? I'll put this back up. I want you to see this. This is back to what we just looked at, chapter 14. And then I looked, and behold, on Mount Zion stood the Lamb. Who's the Lamb? Christ. Where is he at? Standing on Mount Zion. When does that happen? At the second coming. We're in chapter 7 and all of a sudden, or chapter 14 here, and we're all of a sudden all the way at the end. This is the end. This is the second coming. This is one of those things that's kind of out of sequence. So what's going on? What he's saying is, in chapters like 13 and 12, Satan is unleashing everything he has against the Jews. He is eradicating them everywhere. Chapter 14 says, oh, and by the way, when we get to the second coming, there stands the 144,000. Not 143,000. He didn't lose just a few. They're all still there. They all survive. They are divinely protected, not just from the judgment, but from the martyrdom. When we hear about what we'll see here in a moment, which is that the number of folks who come to Christ is unnumberable, this is how. This is part of how. This is a missionary force of 144,000 unencumbered. They don't have a family to worry about. These guys are able to just go wherever needed and spread the gospel for a period of years and share the gospel of Christ to the world. That's who these guys are. Let me show you this, and then I'll. Is anybody still writing? Yeah, I'll put it back. All right, let me show you this. And I heard the number of the sealed, 144,000, sealed from every tribe of the sons of Israel, and it goes through and gives a list. And this list is Judah, Reuben, Gad, Asher, Naphtali, and on and on and on, right? Okay. So let me put that back. The question on your sheet: which of the tribes are missing and why? So you know that there are 12 tribes. There are 29 lists of the tribes that show up in the scriptures. 29 different lists. And many of those lists are different lists. And you're like, wait a minute, they left so-and-so out. Or why are they in there? Or that kind of thing, okay? So I want us to take a moment. This is, again, one of those things where you read certain commentators and they'll say, well, so-and-so's missing, but we don't know why. Get over it, move on. That kind of thinking. I saw something this week I think is a compelling answer to that, and I'd like to make sure you guys see this. If you don't buy in, that's fine. Again, we're allowed to love each other, disagree lovingly, whatever. All right. If you missed the rest of that, see me after and I'll get it for you. All right. So let's go to Genesis 35. Genesis 35 is the first listing. Again, I'm not going to read through it all, but there's the list, and there are two tribes that are listed, which is Joseph and Dan. And I'm going to highlight those two because I want us to see what happens with them. When you get to Joshua chapter 14, it says, for the people of Joseph were two tribes, Manasseh and Ephraim, okay? And no portion was given to the Levites in the land, but only cities to dwell in. So they divide up into these 12 tribes in the land, but the Levites don't get an area. They have cities scattered. So therefore, Joseph, his family, he had two sons, Manasseh and Ephraim, and they each have a tribe. So now you're still back to 12. You get what happened there? Joseph drops off, you add in Manasseh and Ephraim, you're still at 12. So that's the 12 settlements within Israel. When you see a map, you'll see Manasseh and Ephraim, and you don't see Joseph. So that's the first change. After Solomon's kingdom was divided, and you had the northern 10 tribes and then the southern 2 tribes, the king, I think it's Rehoboam, can't remember, says, so the king took counsel and made 2 golden calves. And he said to the people, you have gone up to Jerusalem long enough. Behold your gods, O Israel, who brought you up out of the land of Egypt. And he set one at Bethel, and the other he put in Dan. So what is this? This is the northern tribes. The king did not want his people going to Jerusalem to the other southern tribes to worship. So he sets up 2 golden calves. There's your God. This is the one that rescued you out of Egypt. Go worship them instead. Okay, so where does he put them? Bethel and Dan. Bethel is in Ephraim, and that's a city, and Dan is the tribe and where the other one is at. So what he had is at the top end of the map, because where Dan had kind of migrated to, they had one, and at the very southern end, right before you got to Jerusalem, there was another one. So he bracketed the northern kingdom with these 2 golden calves. They, the people of the northern tribes, went and worshiped these golden calves. And this is, it says here in verse 30, then this thing became a sin, for the people went as far as Dan to be before one. Meaning Dan's way out there, but they went all the way up there to get before one of these golden idols. What you see here is these two tribes leading that northern 10 into idolatry, is what's happening there. In Deuteronomy 29, it says, beware lest there be among you a man, a woman, a clan, or a tribe that would lead you into idolatry. So if a man or a clan or a woman or a tribe leads you into idolatry, there will be a judgment on them. And here at the very bottom it says, and then the Lord will single him out from all the tribes of Israel for calamity. So there is a judgment on a tribe that leads the other tribes into idolatry. And I think that's what you see happening here. So what's encouraging about this, if you look at these 29 lists, and I don't mean the order in which they show up, because one we just read is one of the latter renderings of that list, but it's during the tribulation. At the very end, you have the millennial reign of Christ. During the millennial reign, that's being dealt with in Ezekiel 48. So chronologically, this is the last list given of the 12 tribes. And there is Joseph, and there is Dan. They're both back. So God, in his sovereignty, does have to punish the tribes who led them into idolatry, and therefore they're not part of the 144,000, but they do survive all the way through, at least some, because they make it into the millennial kingdom, and there they are listed, and they are given an allotment of land. God also says he would never wipe out any of the tribes, and this is an evidence of that. They make it all the way through to the end, and his grace, he restores them back to being part of the 12 tribes. So that is why you see these different lists. There's always a reason, and the point of that is you will see, again, skeptics, the Bible can't even get the 12 tribes right. How am I supposed to trust it for other stuff? I mean, that'd be pretty easy just to write out the 12 tribes, and it's got all these different lists that can't even count. You know, it's that kind of snarky stuff that gets said I want you to understand that's why these lists look different at times. Okay, so the answer to the question would be Dan and Ephraim. By the way, in the listing, it lists Manasseh and Joseph. So Ephraim's sort of listed, because if you take Joseph and you split it into two groups, you have Manasseh and Ephraim. Well, if you take Manasseh out and you say Joseph, who is that? It would be whoever's left, that's Ephraim. So Ephraim's actually kind of there, listed, but not as not by name. So anyway, it says Dan and Ephraim, because they led the people into idolatry, but God is faithful and brings them back. And then I've given you that reference there in Ezekiel. That's where they're restored in the millennial kingdom. And I would credit the tracking down of those scriptures to a guy named David Hawking. I wanted to make sure I gave him some credit on that. So we're back to Revelation 7. After this I looked, and behold, a great multitude that no one could number. So this is after the sealing of the 144,000. He's listed them off. The next section, after this I looked, and behold, a great multitude that no one could number, from every nation, from all tribes and peoples and languages, standing before the throne and before the Lamb, clothed in white robes, with palm branches in their hands, and crying out with a loud voice, Salvation belongs to our God, who sits on the throne, and to the Lamb. And all the angels were standing around the throne and around the elders and the four living creatures, and they fell on their face before the throne and worshipped God, saying, Amen, blessing and glory and wisdom and thanksgiving and honor and power and might be to our God forever and ever. Amen. So, question. Who are the great multitude, or who is the great multitude? That's a grammar question. One of you can riddle out, but who is this great multitude? Who are these folks? It says a great multitude that no one could number, from every nation. So we know it's more than just the Jews. From all tribes and peoples and languages, even down to, where you have a part of the world where they'll have, they speak 17 dialects in a country or something. Some from everybody, some from all those tongues and nations and languages are there in this mix. Pretty amazing. They're standing before the throne and before the Lamb, clothed with white robes with palm branches in their hands, and crying out with a loud voice, Salvation belongs to our God, who sits on the throne, and to the Lamb. Yep.
Just to make sure we're understanding, this is the believers, which is actually the tribulation saints that we're looking at, not the saved now.
Right. Yeah, good distinction. The point I wanted to draw out, and I'm going to just, let me show you this, and then I think it is those who are being reached by the 144,000. Again, this is kind of this parenthesis, it's a pause here. So the sealing happens during that half hour. This is not. This is, those 144,000 are going out into the world, and they're reaching the lost all over the globe. And this is them. These are the people who have been reached for Christ by the 144,000. And the number of folks coming to Christ during that tribulation is almost unnumberable. Well, it says it is unnumberable. It's a numberless number. And all the angels stood around the throne and around the elders and the four living creatures, and they fell on their face before the throne and worshiped God, saying, we have this great benediction. Amen, blessing and glory and wisdom and thanksgiving and honor and power and might be to our God forever and ever. Amen. As we keep moving through the section, it says, Then one of the elders addressed me being John there, saying, Who are these clothed in white robes, and from where have they come? And I said, Sir, you know. And he said to me, now I want you to the commentators treat this differently. Some will say the elder doesn't even know who they are. Some will say John doesn't know. I would make the argument the elder does know. He's asking John to see if John will answer, and John's like, you know. It's like, I don't know. Because then the very next thing is the elder tells him. And nobody told the elders, in this intervening period. So I think the elder does know who they are. It says, these are the ones coming out of the great tribulation. They have washed their robes and made them white in the blood of the Lamb. So this is how we know for certain these are not us. This is not the church. We're told specifically these are those coming out of the great tribulation. So these are tribulation saints that are coming out of every tribe, tongue, and nation, not just Jews. And again, you can see I've again seen it talked about both ways. Some will say these folks are still on the earth. Others say they're in heaven. To me, that seems like they're in heaven because they're standing before the throne and things like that's what you see next. So there's my answer to that question. Who are the great multitude? I would say they are both Jewish and Gentile tribulation saints. That's the way I would answer that. Go ahead.
For these 144,000 to reach the nations, okay? We don't know what kind of transportation is going to be back then, but there could be like a type of Philip with the Ethiopian who he ministered to, and the next thing you know, he was seen no more, and maybe it was 60, 70 miles up the coast ministering, just like that.
We're not told that there would be any kind of instant transport type thing. You know what I mean? These guys are still human, meaning they're not like the resurrected Christ who can walk through walls and that kind of thing. Could there be a miraculous thing like you see with Philip? Yeah, I wouldn't say, God, you're not allowed to do that. I don't see anywhere where we're given that.
Right. And
also, I don't know that there would be a need for it because of the length of time, meaning I think these guys are here for a long time. I think when it says they're the first fruits, I think they may actually be saved fairly early on during the tribulation, and then they're sealed at this part. And then they are running all over the world, just doing the gospel, whatever. Yeah, go ahead.
With the kind of communication we have today.
Yeah.
Everybody's smartphone can talk to anybody.
Yeah.
And go on, what is it, Facebook? And
Yeah.
all that other stuff.
Yeah.
I would imagine the people, 100 years ago probably had a hard time understanding how that could happen.
Yeah.
But for us, we can see it because we got all of the technology today.
There's quite a
God
few.
knew that technology was coming.
Yeah. There's quite a few things like that where the whole world sees these two witnesses we'll read about in weeks to come laying in the street dead. And you're like, how do you see that from Africa? Whatever. Well, today we call it, Fox or CNN or whatever. Of course, everybody in the world could see it. So when it talks about at the end, knowledge will increase, is in Daniel, I think it talks about that. Yes, our knowledge is increasing, but I don't think that's what that's a reference to. I think it means we'll understand it better. Our knowledge of what we're reading will increase because it'll make sense because of things like, Fox News or cell phones or airplanes or, all that stuff. Oh, I get how that could happen. Well, back then they were like, how in the world would that happen? You see what I mean? So, all right, let's keep moving here. One thing, I got actually one of those slips when we started the series. If people, can people be saved during the tribulation? So this is the week to answer that. First part of that would be absolutely, right? We just read the number of tribulation saints is unnumberable. But I do want to address this, and I think that question got asked in part because I've taught on this before. And again, there's two takes on this. I don't see another way to understand it besides the way I'm going to present it to you. But this is in 2 Thessalonians 2. It talks about the coming of the Antichrist. And then it says, the coming of the lawless one, the Antichrist, is by the activity of Satan and with all power and false signs and wonders, and with all wicked deception for those who are perishing because they refuse to love the truth and so be saved. So he's saying they will be deceived by these false lies, false wonders and signs and stuff, right? I want you to catch this, though, where it says, because they refuse to love the truth and so be saved. Because they refuse to love the truth, meaning they knew the truth. The gospel's presented. They see it. They get it. I got it. I don't want it. I want my sin. They refused to love the truth and so be saved. Therefore, God sent them a strong delusion. This is a judgment for their lack of belief. Why does he send the strong delusion? So that they may believe what is false, these false signs and wonders, in order that they may be condemned who did not believe the truth, but had pleasure with unrighteousness. I believe this is prior to the rapture. I witness to someone. They see the gospel. They hear it. And they're like, I don't want that because I want my sin. I want the pleasure of unrighteousness. And then the rapture happens. Okay, I got it. I want in. No. Now you have the strong delusion as a judgment. And now you can't. I think that's what that's saying. If I'm wrong, the Lord will sort that out with me
Seems
later.
like there's a lot of commitment to that delusion in our nation right now.
Explain what you mean.
When you, every time I see the news,
Yeah.
you better accept this. Or
Oh,
else you're
yeah.
in.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
It is amazing. Yeah. Well, I'm going to tap into that more in I think another week or two, but it's really just alarming. So, what does this mean for us? This means do the best we can within our efforts to reach the loved ones we have. In other words, don't think, well, maybe I shouldn't tell them, and that way they haven't heard the gospel, and that way they can get saved. No, that's bad logic. Don't do that. You don't want them going through the tribulation either. But when you think about it, we kind of think, well, surely everybody's heard the gospel, And the reality is that there's billions of people that have not heard the gospel, and that is who would be saved during the tribulation period. All right. Last section of Revelation 13. 7, 13 to 17. I looked down and saw 13. Therefore they are before the throne of God and serve him day and night in his temple. This is what makes me think these folks are in heaven. And he who sits on the throne will shelter them with his presence. They shall hunger no more, neither thirst any more. The sun shall not strike them, nor any scorching heat. For the Lamb in the midst of the throne will be their shepherd, and he will guide them to springs of living water, and God will wipe away every tear from their eye. Now, when we went through the Heaven series, we noticed, when does God wipe away every tear? It's in the new heavens and the new earth. It doesn't happen until chapter 22. So I do think this is a reference to, because they have, here would be two ways to see this. One is, these folks they're the multitude that's saved, but currently they're still on earth, and this is a statement about what's going to happen to them in the end, because it is a statement about what's going to happen to them in the end, meaning he's talking about wiping away tears, which doesn't happen until after the millennium. So is this just a further description of who these guys are, or is this talking about them being in heaven and serving God because of their being killed during the tribulation, and he wipes away their tears then? Or so there's kind of two ways to interpret that. I would lean toward, I think they may be in heaven, but I do think this is more of a description of them at the end. So, which leads us to chapter 8. So open your Bibles now and we'll dig into channel. We're done. When the Lamb opened the seventh seal, there was silence in heaven for about half an hour. And then I saw 7 angels who stood before God, and 7 trumpets were given to them. And so we're going to see this 7th seal and then the beginning of the 7 trumpets here in the next week or two. So it just keeps getting more and more and more complicated. for this to try to get your head around, but I do hope that it is beneficial for you. The one thing we talked about at the very beginning is that this is the revelation of Jesus Christ. And I want to try to pull out each week what's something we learned about Christ. And one of the things is that when he seals these 144,000, and then literally all hell breaks loose on earth, meaning the wrath of God is pouring out, and the Satan is going around the world trying to wipe out every Jew he can, these 144,000 are standing there with him at the end. He has the ability to see us through whatever he wants us to go through. And his provision may be homegoing, like it was for Stephen, right? That could be the way he provides for you. Or it could be the famous gentleman in England, I can't remember his name, someone of you'll know it. He sits his orphans down and they give thanks for bread that they didn't have. George Mueller, thank you. And a truck broke down outside and they got bread that they had just prayed for, right? I mean, my point is God can provide in whatever way he chooses. But just the faithfulness of God, I think, really stood out to me this week in this chapter. So let me pray for us and we'll wrap up and head you guys off to church. Dear Heavenly Father, thank you for your word. Thank you for the blessing that we have of being able to see your love and your care and your protection, your faithfulness to those who are yours. Whether we see death or whether we survive to be another day at your service, either way, we know that it is within your hand and your plan, and we're grateful that we can trust you with that. Thank you for all that we've learned this morning. I pray that it would draw us closer to you, give us more confidence in your word, and we pray all these things in Jesus' name. Amen.